We've officially made it to October, which means that media day across the NBA is going down, and training camp is starting to kick off across the league, and all of that means that the regular season is right around the corner. It's been a long, eventful offseason, and all of the moves made have led up to this. But while some teams did better for themselves than others, no team ever comes out without a flaw, which brings us to today's video. This will be a two-part video, so today and tomorrow we will be going through all 30 NBA teams, discussing the biggest issue or weakness with their roster going into the new year, and in this video specifically we'll be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, then we'll finish up with the Western Conference in my next video, so stay tuned for that. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll start with the Atlanta Hawks, and their biggest issue going into the new season is the fact that they're battling two different timelines right now. The Hawks tried going all in a few years ago when they traded for DeJounte Murray, but his pairing with Trae Young never blossomed as they hoped it would, so Murray was traded away this offseason. Unfortunately for the Hawks, their current core is not good enough to be anything more than a play-in team at best. But they also just landed the #1 pick in the draft to select Zachary Reese-Shea, and they still have Trae Young on the roster in his prime trying to win. They didn't do enough to form a competitive team, but they're also not fully committed to a rebuild, so they may be stuck in limbo for a while. Next is the Boston Celtics, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their depth at the big man positions. The Celtics are the defending champions, so anything picked as an issue for them is obviously going to be a nitpick, but Kristaps Porzingis is not going to be healthy for the first month or two of the season, and while Al Horford can capably fill in for him in the starting lineup, their other options for big men are a bit more suspect. Xavier Tillman fell out of the Grizzlies rotation before being traded to Boston because he's a bit of a liability on the offensive end, and Luke Kornet is a streaky at best stretch big man with defensive issues of his own, so they're going to be running a lot of small ball lineups in Porzingis' absence. Next is the Brooklyn Nets, and their biggest issue going into the new season is figuring out how to distribute minutes across their team. The Nets are projected to be one of the worst teams in the NBA this year, going through what should be a rebuilding season, but they have a lot of veteran talent that could end up eating into the younger players' minutes. The team has Cam Thomas developing into a very good scoring talent as a young player, and they also took a swing on Killian Hayes to try to revive his young career, but then players like Ben Simmons, Dennis Schroeder, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Cam Johnson may end up playing 30 more minutes a night too. Next is the Charlotte Hornets, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their floor spacing. LaMelo Ball is one of the most creative playmakers in the league, but his creation skills might end up being hampered a bit if his teammates can't keep the defense honest as shooters. Players like Brandon Miller, Josh Green, Grant Williams, and Miles Bridges are all average three-point shooters at best. Vasily Micic, Cody Martin, and Trey Mann are below average from three historically, and their centers are not stretch big men either. Next is the Chicago Bulls, and their biggest issue is trying to maneuver Zach LaVine's situation with the team. It hasn't exactly been a secret that LaVine and the Bulls seem to be drifting apart, but despite being on the trade block all summer, Zach LaVine still has not been traded. He's coming off of an injury on top of a season where he would have easily had his worst in a long time, so his value is at its lowest, and allowing him to play his way back into favor isn't the worst strategy in the world, but in the meantime, they're also stuck in limbo between trying to win and rebuilding. Next is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their biggest issue is figuring out how to maximize Darius Garland. Over the last few years, Donovan Mitchell's future with the team was looming over the team's heads, but with Mitchell signing an extension this summer, he's locked in. But now, they're running it back with a very similar squad to the last few years, and they also still need to figure out how to make the Mitchell and Garland pairing work. Garland was an all-star before Donovan Mitchell arrived, but his effectiveness and confidence have taken a hit over the last few seasons, so that's a big piece to their puzzle that they still have yet to crack. Next is the Detroit Pistons, and their biggest issue going into the new season is finding the right lineup combinations. The Pistons struggled a lot last season because of the combination of the fact that they were the youngest roster in the league and their overall lack of reliable shooters in their lineup. This summer they added a few useful veterans in Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris, and Malik Beasley who can all shoot better than what they had, but they can't play all of them at once without sacrificing the development of their young core, and the young core doesn't quite have enough reliable shooters in it to go on their own, so that balancing act will be a work in progress. Next is the Indiana Pacers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their perimeter defense. When the Pacers traded for Pascal Siakam last season, they improved their front court's defensive potential, putting him next to Miles Turner in the front court, but they as a team still ranked just 24th in the league on defense, and their guards do struggle keeping their men in front of them, and with the team running back pretty much the same squad as last year, it's hard to expect much different. Next is the Miami Heat, and their biggest issue going into the new season is keeping Jimmy Butler happy. Stop me if you've heard this before, but there are rumblings that Jimmy Butler is unhappy with the current state of his team, and with his contract approaching its end, that's a situation worth monitoring. Butler and Heat president Pat Riley have butted heads on quite a few occasions this summer, and after an offseason where the Heat didn't really make any significant moves to improve the roster that landed in the play-in tournament for a second consecutive season last year, we may be headed to rocky territory for them. Next is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their biggest issue going into the new season is team chemistry. Last year was a weird one for the Bucks as they brought in Damian Lillard, who never really seemed that happy to be there. They fired their head coach mid-season to hire Doc Rivers to replace him, and injuries marred their playoff appearance. Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo also just said at Media Day that they never even saw each other this offseason, and the team had a losing record under Doc Rivers, so things are quietly trending in a weird direction for this group, who aren't getting any younger either. Next is the New York Knicks, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their interior defense. The Knicks lost Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, who broke out last year as an elite defensive big man, but they just made a big splash to bring in Karl Anthony Towns to replace him at least. Towns' ability to space the floor offensively is going to help the Knicks out a ton, but he has notoriously been a poor defender throughout his career, and with Mitchell Robinson's health, which is still not at 100% health, still being a question, they're not the interior force that they were a year ago. Next is the Orlando Magic, and their biggest issue is their lack of playmakers. Last year, the Magic emerged as a defensive force, and after their addition of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope this summer, they got even better defending the perimeter, but last year they were the worst-ranked offense amongst the teams that made the playoffs, and their lack of creativity at the point guard position definitely played a big role in that. They still don't have a natural playmaker in their roster to orchestrate the offense, and while Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are very good scoring talents, they undoubtedly need a facilitator to take things to the next level. Next is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their biggest issue is the power forward position. The Sixers had a very solid offseason revamping their rotation, but the one position lacking for them is at power forward. They're going to be running small ball lineups with either Kelly Oubre or Caleb Martin in that role, and there's a chance that Gershon Yabusele could break into the rotation there after a strong Olympic showing, but he's an unproven player at the NBA level, so they're a little undersized at the moment. Next is the Toronto Raptors, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their inexperience. The Raptors are now rebuilding, so this isn't really that bad in actuality, but they're probably not going to be winning a whole lot of games, with their veteran leaders being Jakob Poeltl and Kelly Olynyk. They've got promising young guys that will continue to develop, and youth comes with inconsistency, so they will have a lot of that. And finally, the last team in the Eastern Conference is the Washington Wizards, and their biggest issue is figuring out Jordan Poole's role. Last year, the Wizards traded for Jordan Poole hoping he could break out in a lead role, but he ended up having an incredibly inefficient season, and his defense is amongst the worst in the entire league, so they ended up benching him. But now the question for a new season becomes, do they keep him on the bench, do they go back to starting him, or do they possibly consider trading him? And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what concerns you with these teams going into the new year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.